Welcome everyone to this afternoon's World Affairs program. My name is Judy Avila and I'm a reporter at the Francisco Chronicle. And previously I worked as a reporter in Mexico City, where I covered topics of abortion, gender, abortion access, and sexual and reproductive rights. I focus on as I said, abortion access, mispractices, and efforts from anti-abortion groups to stop women and people from getting abortions. World Affairs is a San Francisco-based nonprofit, nonpartisan forum that explores international issues and ideas beyond borders in all their nuance and complexity. I'm here with Eugenia López Uribe and Paula Ávila-Guillen. Eugenia is a regional director for the Americas and the Caribbean and the International Planned Parenthood Federation. She is an experienced advocate for gender equality and sexual and reproductive rights, promoting innovation in the delivery of health services from human rights perspective. She began her professional career as a volunteer with the Gente Joven program of MexFam, IPPF's Mexican Member Association. And internationally, Eugenia has engaged in the follow-up of the commitments of the International Conference of Population and Development, the Beijing Conference on Women's Rights, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, and the UN General Assembly on AIDS. Eugenia is currently based in Bogota, Colombia. I'm also joined by Paula, who described herself as a Green Wave movement leader. She's an international human rights lawyer and executive director at the Women's Equality Center in New York City. She has helped lead the fight to decriminalize abortion in her home country, Colombia, and supported efforts in Argentina and Mexico. Paula is part of the coalition of leaders holding El Salvador's government accountable for the systematic persecution and criminalization of women unjustly imprisoned after having suffered obstetric emergencies, and has contributed to the freedom of over 66 Salvadoran women. This is very experienced, very impressive. We are very happy to have such experienced women with us, and we will talk more about how the criminalization, the fight for the criminalization of abortion in Latin America happened, and we will also focus and talk about El Salvador. A note about Q&A. If you have any question, you can ask. We have a Q&A feature on Zoom, and we can write your questions there. And if you want to address your question specifically to either Eugenia or Paula Ávila-Guillen, and we will try our best to answer this question. So Eugenia and Paula, welcome to World Affairs. Before we start talking and discussing this topic in more depth, I wanted to give the audience a bit of context of Marea Verde, this movement in Latin America that has existed historically for a while, but it became more visible in the last years. In 2018, after Argentina was discussing the decriminalization of abortion, it was being discussed in the Legislative Assembly. It had been approved, but then the Senate overturned this initiative by a very tight vote. And for us who followed this in real time, this was something very exciting at first, as we saw that it had been approved in the Congress, but very infuriating once it was not approved in the Senate. But as upsetting as this was also very motivating for activists across the continent, across Latin America, to began protests, but also fights like in other aspects, such as lobbying or different ways to be able to make abortion legal in their countries. In December 2020, abortion was approved both by the legislative chamber and the Senate in Argentina, and became legal to have an abortion until the 14th week of pregnancy. In 2022, in Colombia, the Constitutional Court issued a landmark ruling to decriminalize abortion in Colombia up to the 24th week of pregnancy. And similarly, in Mexico, in September 2020, the Mexican Supreme Court issued a ruling recognizing a constitutional right to safe, legal, and free abortion services, and made unconstitutional to punish abortion as a crime, which created a landmark that clears the way for the legalization of abortion across the country. Currently, about a third of states in Mexico have made abortion legal. 10 out of 32 states now allow abortion, and actually 8 of these states made this legal in 2021. So this legalization has gained momentum in the past couple years. And even though Latin America has been gaining this force during the past couple years, there are still countries who have been fighting and haven't been able to make abortion legal, such as Ecuador, who is in a continuing battle, and other countries who are still criminalizing and have very strict laws to punish women who are deciding over their own bodies. And we will talk about this, and specifically we will talk about El Salvador. So, okay, this was a large context, but I wanted to ask some questions to Eugenia and Paula. First, if you could talk about first what have been the regional consequences of the criminalization of abortion in Argentina, Mexico, and Colombia. What have the impacts on policy, health services, women traveling to other countries has been like?
Thank you so much. I think Judy, something that to add a little bit more context of the green wave is that you cannot talk about the green wave without talking about the pañuelo and the green bandana and the meaning it has. And I think that the reason why it's important is because it helped it shifted the narrative of the fight from a coalition to a movement. Because all of a sudden there was not a group of organizations working together. It was anybody who had a pañuelo and will tie around the wrist or carrying around the purses, they was able to join a larger movement to show support. And I think that made a big difference, because then the fight didn't belong to institutional organizations, but it belonged to the people. And I think that really supported the marches. And the pañuelo that was created in Argentina by the founders of La Campaña Nacional por el Aborto Legal, Seguro y Gratuito. It's green because symbolize health and symbolize life, but it's a pañuelo because the mothers that fought for the fight against the dictatorship and Las Madres de la Plaza de Mayo used it around their head, initially as white, as a way to protest. So it's a symbol of resistance, and it's a symbol of resistance for abortion. And I think when you're able to transform those symbols and those actions into movements into concrete policy changes, that is what we saw in Argentina, Mexico, and Colombia, you are creating social and cultural change. And I think that is just extremely significant. that doesn't mean the fight is over, because I believe our fight will never be over. This is, as long as we live in a patriarchal society that believes that women and others who can get pregnant need to be controlled by the state, and that our bodies need to be ruled. I feel that we will never be able to stop fighting. But I do think the building of that movement and the legal and policy changes that came after that creating a sense, number one, the change is possible. There's something that many times when you are fighting social justice issues, you never know if you actually are going to achieve change. So it gives us a sense of hope that you actually, that this was possible. Number two, that actually abortion was a political winning issue. In the case of Argentina, we had a president that ran in a platform of abortion after the 2017 failure of the law and got elected on a platform of abortion. And none of the Congress members who voted in favor of abortion in 2017 were not reelected because of abortion. So you are also proving that abortion is a political win. And also that you cannot change societies just by changing laws, right? And there is no immediately the access gets granted, and it's no immediately the just after you change the law, the fight is not over. And I think that we see those cases in Mexico, we still are seeing those cases in Colombia, but the fight doesn't get over after you have achieved something so victorious and so amazing, but that you actually need to still push for change to really guarantee access. That I think is what we all want and are fighting for.
Yes, thank you for mentioning the pañuelo verde. I actually was the first line on my notes and I just skipped it. And yes, I think it has become a symbol that, as you mentioned, it transforms how we perceive the movement. I really like what you said, that it shifted towards like from a coalition to a movement. I was also, when I was preparing for this, I was also reading how other musicians, artists, during their shows, they would come up with a pañuelo verde to show support and how this statement. So yeah, thank you for remarking that. Yeah, it's extremely important. And yeah, Eugenia, would you like to add anything?
Yes, I just want to share that the Marea Verde has strong roots in the history of Latin America. And we started as a region with the campaign for September 28 for the free abortion, who had a strong element of Caribbean feminist leaders and organizations. And this reflects the reality of our region. No? Still, Central America and the Caribbean are the countries with the more restrictive policies and laws around abortion. And I think that this is very relevant. We also have the butterflies and the 25th of November as the date of elimination of violence against women. So this is part of a broader movement that has been living in our region. And this is one of the most progressive regions. This is very important to keep in mind. And the other thing is related to what you were saying about the history of Argentina, Colombia, and Mexico, because I think that we have been able to encourage and inspire each other. So when one country has finally get the law, then the other country realizes that this is possible and the movement gets stronger. I think that what happened in Argentina, as Paula was saying, is that the movement, it is not just that it was a movement, but it was also an intergenerational movement. So we were taking the resistance from the mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, which were at that time grandmothers already. And the girls that were taking the handcarts were very, very young. So the abortion movement in our region is intergenerational, and also it convenes other identities. So one way of solidarity has also been with the LGBTIQ movement. We have learned about solidarity between movements in the abortion process. And it is very different to live in Mexico or in Argentina and Colombia and be in those things. For example, when you were making the background, I remember in 2009 when for the first time the Supreme Court in Mexico said that not only the local law was constitutional, but also that the other states should do something. So it's a long run, no? It has been a long fight. But what is very important is that we are building this network of support, this network of inspiration, to be in the regional spaces, chanting together with the handcrafts going like this in the intergovernmental spaces, feeling the strong presence of the movement and being assured that the patriarchy is going to be over because we are taking it out. I don't know how you say it in English, but we are struggling against the patriarchy together. And the laws are different. And I think that this is part of the social destigmatization of abortion that is very needed, and that is at the root of the wins that we have now.
Yes. So we got a message saying that well, thank you for your participation. First, I do think that this is a movement that has resonated to many women and people who get pregnant, as you mentioned, and created this sense of belonging. I really like what you said about generational participation. I think I remember during when these protests were happening, there was a lot of emphasis about saying probably your mother or your grandmother had an abortion too, but they never talked about it. They were never allowed. So talk to your family about this and let's break the stigma. And I think opening this conversation, this international intergenerational conversation created a bond and a sense of belonging that made the movement stronger. So now we're gonna go next to the trailer. We are gonna play the trailer for the documentary called Fly So Far. And yeah, it's a 7-minute trailer about the reproductive rights advocacy strategy to fight for the rights and freedom of Salvadoran women charged and imprisoned following obstetric emergencies. So
¿Qué le piden los jueces ahora?
Que me concedan mi libertad.
El aborto es un crimen. Gracias a nuestra Constitución, El Salvador no permite el aborto desde ninguna de sus visiones.
Es un acto cruel, es un acto barbárico.
Primero dijeron que era aborto y después lo cambiaron de aborto a homicidio agravado. Me penaron para 30 años.
A mí se me ocurre que los jueces ni siquiera leyeron la autopsia. Es totalmente una conjetura que no tiene ninguna base material ni tampoco tiene base científica.
In El Salvador, abortion is prohibited in all cases.
A country that has some of the world's strictest abortion.
17 women are currently in San Salvador prison, convicted of killing their babies.
Estamos hartas de esta situación. Estamos hartas que nos sigan violentando. Jamás en la vida se me había ocurrido que yo, Teodora Vázquez, iba a estar en una cárcel. Nunca.
Paula, you work, well, as far as I understand, you work closely with this case. So I wanted to ask you first, what was your role in Teodora's case? And if you could provide us a little bit more context of this case of Teodora and where she's now.
Yes, I actually was in the trial in that moment in that they are showing in the documentary, this the hearing where they're going to review her sentence, and she actually does not get released that day. I started working with the cases and with La Agrupación Ciudadana, this organization that led all of this work when I was working at the Center for Reproductive Rights. And when we went, my first trip to El Salvador, our partners, La Agrupación, said, you need to go and do a visit to the prison. And it was a group of us that we were kind of coming from international organizations. And we were all convinced that we were going to go and see women who were in prison because of abortion, and which was already traumatizing, it was already awful. But what we discovered was that at that point, what it was thought to be 17 women were not in prison for abortion, but they actually had miscarriages and stillbirths. And because of miscarriages and stillbirths, they were sentenced up to 40 years in prison. And the partners were overwhelmed by this reality, but ready to fight. And they called for an international coalition in a cry for help to say, we need all hands here willing to help. So I started working with the partners, trying to provide advice, political and legal advice to many of the cases, including the case of Teodora. And during the process of many of the campaigns and in many of the efforts, we discovered that there were not only 17 women, but in reality, there were, at one point, we were able to document over 60 women who were in prison for similar circumstances. And that's one of the, as I call, unintended consequences. And I like to believe they're unintended because I really think, I am hoping that nobody really wants to send somebody to prison for a miscarriage and stillbirth, especially as somebody who had suffered a miscarriage, and how painful it is. But the way that Teodora describes a lot of her process is she was grieving the loss of her child as she was also grieving the loss of her freedom. And I just, it was extremely painful for them, but also to witness and don't be able to do anything. These cases were, in the large majority of them, they were already old cases. Some of them have been serving already up to 10 years in prison. Legal remedies were already exhausted. And you had very, very limited options as an attorney to know what to do. To try to have a revision of sentence was almost impossible. So we started thinking of what else can we do? And we were able to create alternatives, legal alternatives, such as the reduction of the sentence. There is a possibility in which, basis on certain legal basis in El Salvador, the Supreme Court reviews these cases and determined that maybe they had been unjust or they had been disproportionate, and they reduce the sentences to time served. And that is actually the legal kind of path that we were able to find to free most of the women. At this point, all of the women, of course, my cat jumps now. At one point, all of the women At this point, all of the women are free, with one exception of one case. However, the criminal, which is great news and it's fantastic news, Teodora is free, and now she leads an organization called Mujeres Libres. They advocate for what happens after you are out of prison, because that was something that I think nobody in the coalition, in the movement, was prepared for. We knew how to try to create a legal defense, but what are the needs and what is the work that they encounter after being 10 years in prison? And just in prison is a word that's very different, and is circumstances of reality. They were very different. So her organization supports women who have been in prison, especially starting with the ones who were in prison because of obstetric emergencies. But we are still fighting, and the lawyers in El Salvador are still fighting cases every day. The criminalization continues. As long as there is a total abortion ban in El Salvador and in many other countries, anybody who has a miscarriage or stillbirth and goes and asks for help in the hospital is treated as under suspicion, as a potential criminal. And when you are not able to articulate completely what happened to you in terms the doctors and sometimes the police will be able to understand, that's when they open these cases. And it's one of the realities of living in conditions where abortion is criminalized, but it definitely, at least in the work that we have seen, El Salvador has been one of the harshest countries in applying this type of laws.
Before I ask my main question, I just wanted to quickly follow up on what you said. What other countries have you noticed that have harsh criminalization laws?
Yeah, I will let Eugenia, and I don't know, Eugenia, if I am putting you in the spot to talk about Mexico and Las Libres and Guanajuato, and the cases de Guanajuato, they were famous cases at one point. We have seen about cases in Ecuador as well, even though Ecuador doesn't have a total abortion ban. So in Latin America right now, there are 5 countries that have a total abortion ban. El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. I'm sorry, 6 with Suriname. But in all the other countries, there are some exception systems similar to what we are seeing right now in the United States. And you can access abortion in cases of health, in cases of life, rape, etc. And there is a range of exceptions across the region. But so far as I know, we have seen cases in Ecuador and in Mexico. And I don't know, Eugenia, if you can bring more context into Mexico or know of other countries.
Yeah, I think that it's important to say that these, and you are right, Paula, on the focus that you made, because these were miscarriage. It is not an elected abortion. And the problem that happened after these cases is that other states copied the same system. And we had in Yucatan, in Guanajuato, and in other states of Mexico, the same process. So women they were brought to the services, the health services, as an emergency, an obstetric emergency, to save their lives because of miscarriage, and they ended up in jail. And this is so brutal because we know that access to justice has been an element in our region for ages and in the world, right? We have to prove very, very strongly about violence against women, femicide, everything. And at the same time, the legal elements are used against women when they were not even looking for abortion. So I think this is very strong. And also, this perpetuates a fear and a climate of persecution that goes to other countries that even have legal cases or legal indicators, as Paula is saying. So in the English Caribbean, most of the countries have no access to abortion, even if they have indicators, because of the fear. And this is more strong than the paper that says that if you have X or Y reason, you could get access. So I think that this is something that we need to be very spot on.
Yeah. I wanted, before we move into Q&A, I wanted to ask some central questions about abortion. So in the case of this documentary, we saw that decriminalization targets specifically poor, rural, indigenous women. And also not only the criminalization, but criminalization of just like abortion. Also, when abortion is legal, a lot of these women or people that get pregnant are left out. So what do you think are the policies that need to be taken to include everyone and women who are like in more vulnerable situations? But also, how can the movement for the fighting of decriminalization can also include these populations?
Do you want to go?
Sure.
I think.
So,
go.
Oh, you go, Eugenia, please.
Judy, I think that your question is very important, and especially as we are now reassessing Roe versus Wade, which is without doubt a historical decision. We have not been very good at going to the margins, right? Every time that we create something, then we also create a margin as a result. And I think that what has been very clear is that different movements have different ways of engaging and also different labels that they feel comfortable with. So, for example, we have learned that the indigenous communities and our friends and colleagues that do believe in the feminist movement, they don't feel connected with the identity of being feminist because they have another way of thinking and another cosmovision, as we say it in the Latin American context. So we need to be better at not only building bridges between different identities and different movements, but to really create this other movement that is gestated when you have two different identities. This is very common in the English and the US world. No, they say 1 + 1 should be more than 2. That's what happens when you bring different movements together. There are many principles and elements that we can learn from the disability movement, the indigenous movement, the Afro-descendant movement. And we even have had challenges with the intersectional as a word, because then the Afro-descendant and the indigenous, they say that word doesn't represent us. That word actually deletes us. So we need to understand that if we don't bring everybody to the center and understand the needs and build the ecosystem together, then we will always create this margin as a result. This is different from the state, I think, because the state has the mandate to be free of discrimination. And that mandate should incorporate all the stakeholders so that the services that are designed include them. And it should be easier because the state should have a better possibility to bring everybody together. But I think that the free of discrimination is one of the main challenges in these days in our world.
Yes.
And if I might add, I also think something that happens across almost every law is that laws are never applied equally to everybody, even though they should, because our biases against certain people in the application of the law play a role in this. And this is often the case when it comes from criminalization. And we saw this very vividly in the cases of El Salvador. Almost all the women who were in prison were single. So a lot of the judges will write things like, of course, you even though you have no clear motive, you were ashamed of your pregnancy, and that was your motive. So there was this assumption, right? Of course, because you live so far away, you live in poverty, you didn't have how to feed. So there were all these unconscious bias, or many times very conscious bias against certain conditions. They made the judgment so unfair that the only people who got criminalized were women who were living in poverty, women who were living in rural areas and were coming from public hospitals. But it also plays of what will be the case if a woman who had some privilege arrives to the hospital. She will call a lawyer the moment she is in the hospital. They didn't even knew a lawyer. So they got public defenders. They didn't even know their names. So I think that when we talk about how the law should apply, it should apply equal to all. But in reality, all the internal biases of people, and the reality of our lives, is clear that the law only applies to some. So even we have the phrase, las ricas abortan, las pobres se mueren, and it's rich women have abortions, poor women but die. Because at the end of the day, regardless of the status of the law, if you have some privilege, you probably are going to find a safe way to have an abortion, regardless if it's legal or not.
Yeah. Which something about what you're saying about the abortion and the danger of dying. There has also been a discussion about how to perceive illegal abortion. That illegal abortion, does it mean all the times that it's unsafe abortion, and which also means like abortion is still happening, but it can happen in better conditions, and everyone have the rights, even though it's not the same risk of dying as it was priorly. Everyone deserves access to hospital if they need medical revisions and attention, specialized attention. Paula, I wanted to ask you about how you collaborated with Mexico and Colombians fight for the criminalizing abortion. How have different feminist movements throughout Latin America collaborated, and how do you think us as Latin American activists can get involved and help with our experience now that this situation is happening in the US after the overturn of Roe versus Wade?
Yes, there's sometimes phrases that people who do work in movements that they disagree with, and I hear very often people saying, if you're new to the movement, just shut up and listen. Right? That's something they hear very often in the US, and I completely disagree with that. If you are new to the movement, welcome, because we need you. And I think that is a little bit of the approach that I take in my collaborations and that we have taken across the countries, and that was actually how we were received in every country that we were working. It was never about, oh, you cannot do this, or you do this, or we don't want you here. It was always like, the fight is too big and there is a role for everybody to play, come and sit at the table. And I think that is something that is crucial as we start this fight in the United States. And I think that we as Latinx have a role in, first of all, talking about abortion and talking about abortion in our terms, in how we feel comfortable and how it affects. If you see the restrictions that are happening right now, Florida and Texas are some of the worst states in terms of the laws that they have passed. And they have the largest populations of Latinx. And when I think about, when people tell me about, when people can travel in other states, or there's abortion funds, I always think of undocumented folks who will be able to travel to other states, who might be afraid of even getting pills by mail because of all the possible consequences and the policing that exists for brown communities here in the United States. So is going to affect us disproportional. Maybe not me, I am extremely lucky, I'm full of privilege, I live in New York, I am a lawyer, I can speak English, but because of that, I need to use my voice for those who cannot be in those situations, like who cannot freely to talk and advocate. And I believe in what the green wave represents. And it's this idea that anybody wearing green can be a fighter, that you don't need to belong to an organization, that you don't need to have affiliations, that you don't need to be part of a logo, that you need to just talk about the issue. And when people tell me, oh, but it's only sharing online or it's sharing how one protest, how is that going to create impact? I always reply, just imagine that everybody who is asking that same question will do it, but it will happen. You form a beach, a beautiful sand of beach by each grain of sand, filling it little by little. So if you're just a person who is just starting to care about this issue, welcome. Learn, join, start following, and start talking to everybody around about this. We can honor the fighters of those who started fighting in Latin America a long time ago by respecting what is the green wave and by taking it in with love. But as Marta Lanis is one of the founders of La Campaña says, the pañuelo and the green wave belongs to everybody who needs an abortion. It doesn't belong to anybody else, right? It just belongs to people who needs them. And I think that it's very important that we start thinking about this issue as an issue that touches us, that affects us, and it's going to have a disproportionate impact in our Latino communities here in the United States.
Yes, thank you for responding this. I wanted to, we only have 5 more minutes. I wanted to ask Eugenia about what do you think are the major takeaways from this successful results, such as in Colombia, Mexico, Argentina, but what do you think are the challenges that we still have, or things that could be done better or need to be reframed?
So the main takeaway, I think, is that, as Paula is saying, women and people that can gestate have to be at the center, and that we can break the insecurity of that can be associated to abortion by ensuring that people have the right information, the right access to technology, and that they can take their health in their hands with the right accompaniment. And the networks that are present in our region are strong, are leading the way, are innovative, and they have been very well at coming from one border to another and bring solidarity to each other. The abortion funds on the US were teaching the abortion funds on Latin America, and now they're coming back in the other way. So this is very important. Resilience, accompaniment, and solidarity are the main takeaways: intergenerationality, intersectionality. The challenges are investment, and I'm not just speaking about funding, I'm speaking about political will. It has to be there because we have a win and we need to protect it. And it can only be protected if communities are around it. We cannot take it for granted. The bodies of women are a battlefield, and we need to protect each other. We need to make sure that people that can gestate have access to the services and the information without discrimination of gender or any other hate discourse. It is important to come together and fight together.
Thank you. So we have 2 questions. If you have more questions from the audience, you can still type them. So I will read these questions and either of you can respond to this. So it says, I fully support your movement, but how do you reconcile the movement with the history of support for the Inter-American Convention, or Article 4, that is interpreted as meaning that the unborn have a right to life.
So actually, this was already solved by the court in the case of a case against Costa Rica in a case of in vitro fertilization. There's a very famous case, and it's the first time the court interprets what the Article 4 of the American Convention means. And it's very clear that talks about how what the court says is that you cannot protect life from the moment of conception in the same way at 0 weeks of pregnancy, in the same way that you protected at 9 months of pregnancy. So there needs to be a progressive way in the way that it is protected. And the protection is the article itself, it specifically says there's in general a protection from the moment of conception. And this case involved the idea that in vitro fertilization was totally criminalized or prohibited in Costa Rica. And they were challenging this idea because life was protected from the moment of conception. So the court has been very clear about how the Article 4 does not mean that the countries should not be able to have abortion laws. They are two rights. They need to be compensated, evaluated, and that has to be a protection of the person who is pregnant as well, and it needs to be proportional. It's going to be very interesting because right now the court 2 months ago heard for the first time the first abortion case, literally abortion case, is a case in El Salvador. There's the Beatriz case, and what is going to come out of that case is going to really create a precedent for the region of how the court will analyze this article in counterbalance with all the other articles, but also how it will what it will be their official position regarding abortion. So the Artavia Murillo case is a case of Costa Rica, touches in the interpretation of Article 4, but this case is the Beatriz case, it's an abortion case.
Eugenia, do you want to add or anything to that? Okay. We have a question that I think adds up to what you just said. And the question is, the UN Committee for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women includes Article 12 on the right to health. This includes the right to bodily autonomy and encompasses sexual and reproductive freedom. What is the role of multilateral organizations in determining human rights standards and enforcing member states implementing these policies?
I can go if it's okay. I think that multilateral organizations and federations as IPPF with national organizations at the ground level are very important to do what we call the social accountability, the social monitoring of the political commitments that have been done by states, and also the legal obligations that these states have. It's very important that we use the different, the conventions, the status of the Commission of Women, the Commission of the Status of Population and Development, the regional intergovernmental spaces, the UPR, so that we as civil society organizations can do the analysis of what is missing and ensure that the needs of the people are taken into account, so that the states can have better laws and better policies in place.
Okay, thank you. And we have another question, a third question, that which is, what lessons have you learned from your careers in advocacy, and how can they transfer to the U.S. reproductive justice movement to strengthen mobilization and push for legal protections?
I think that one of the biggest lessons, at least for me, has been that we cannot put all our eggs in one basket. And I feel that for many years, all of our strategies were concentrated just in legal strategies, litigation, similar to what it has been in the United States. And if it's something I feel they have learned is that we need to fight in multiple fronts. Yes, we need to litigate, but we also need to use advocacy strategies from national bodies, local bodies, state level bodies, international bodies, that we also need to start having mobilization. And when I talk about the street mobilization, I also go back to my sisters in Argentina to remember that they will tell you that sometimes there were 1 woman marching, 10 women, but then eventually they keep going. Every Thursday they will march, every Tuesday, sorry, they will march, and every Tuesday and eventually they go to 1 million. So the importance of having persistence and not getting dismotivated because, oh, only 100 people show up. No, you need to keep going and keep going to have that vision that change is not going to happen overnight, and the important to always show up on the street no matter what. And the importance to have strategic communications and understand, I think that from previous understandings of communications, we believe that we needed to have one unified message, and that was the key to success. We all talk in the same term and in the same way. But now, thanks to social media, we are able to actually have different audiences for our messages. And I think it is very realistic to believe that the same message that will work for a New Yorker will work for somebody in Alabama. Like, they're completely different people. So I think the importance of also learning how to tailor our messages to the specific audience is something that has really helped us in increment support, because there might be people who might not relate with the idea of autonomy, but might relate with the idea of not sending people to prison, right? So you need to be able to meet people where they are, instead of hoping that one day they are going to wake up and they are just going to be the most feminist people in the world and like, yes, free abortion, right? So I think that level of compromise and of meeting people where they are is something that sometimes is very hard for movements, but I think this is essential if you really want to secure a majority victory. And so, as I say, think in the how to survive today, but the 10-year plan at the same time.
Yes. Oh yeah, go ahead. Okay.
Yes, something that I think that is very relevant for the US is that for the first time, they need to see the South as an example, as an lessons learned. There are very strong organizations that have been working together with US-based organizations that can demonstrate the way and show strategies that have been very effective at the local level. It is a kind of decolonialize the relationship and not only see their peers at the northern level as the way for as a source for innovation and incentivation. It's to go again. And as Paula is saying, I think that is very important to go to the middle, no? To speak to the people in the real lives and in the real possibilities. I think that sometimes we create messages that are very utopic and just for the people that is already working on the field. I think that we need to go back to the real people in the real lives.
Yes, I really like what you both said. Paula, what you said about not putting all the eggs in the same basket, and what you said, Eugenia, about like realistic messages and realistic goals, because yes, there is not only one way to fight. Protests create a big impact, but it's not the only way. Like, protests are not gonna translate directly into legal changes. It is a pressure, yes, but it's not the only fight you need to fight in terms of like the abortion battle. And also what you said about knowing what the context is and what is going to work particularly for that context, because what it work in one country, it might not work in another. What it work in a state, it might not work for another. So thank you so much for everything you brought to this table. It was very valuable. Having your knowledge, your experience. It was my pleasure to moderate this conversation. I think we touched on very important topics, issues, and I hope this inspires to keep the conversation going. As I mentioned, the fight for the decriminalization of abortion, at least in Latin America, is not over. There are many, many countries that are still criminalizing, but even in countries where abortion has been decriminalized, there are other issues that we need to take into account. How to provide and make it accessible for everyone, regardless of what the laws are. So thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this, but I'm gonna read it. That May 20, it's some sites. May 20 is the International Day of Action for Women Health, and this year campaigns highlight that that an attack on sexual and reproductive health and rights anywhere attacks all our rights everywhere. Watch your inbox for a follow-up email from World Affairs with actions and learning opportunities to celebrate hard-fought gains, mobilize, and amplify demands. And to learn more about World Affairs, head to the website, which is www.worldaffairs.org. And you can also discover other upcoming live streams and in-person events, past program recording, and more information about the Unshifting Brown radio show on KQED and podcast. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to be with us.